What if the deepest truths about humanity are not buried in sand, but sealed beneath miles of ice? What if the first civilization did not crumble into dust beneath desert winds, but instead vanished under slow, patient snowfall, layer by silent layer, until memory itself froze? There are places on Earth where the ground does not remember footsteps, where the sky has fallen in white silence for tens of thousands of years, and beneath that silence, something waits. Before you let your body sink completely into this quiet moment, take a second to gently like the video and subscribe, but only if this kind of slow unfolding of forgotten history truly resonates with you. And if you feel inclined, share your location and local time in the comments. It is strangely comforting to imagine how many distant minds are listening together in the same hush of night. Ice has always been mistaken for emptiness. Vast, unbroken plains of Antarctica, the heavy stillness of Greenland, the glaciers that once crawled across Europe and North America during the last glacial maximum. They appear sterile, lifeless, untouched. Yet ice is not absence. It is archive. Each snowfall becomes a page. Each compressed layer becomes a sealed record of atmosphere, of volcanic ash, of cosmic dust, of temperature and time. Scientists drill into these frozen libraries and read air bubbles older than the pyramids, older than agriculture, older even than the earliest known cities. The accepted timeline tells a clean story. Complex civilization began roughly 12,000 years ago, when the ice retreated and agriculture emerged in regions like the Fertile Crescent. Sites such as Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey disrupted that neat narrative, revealing monumental stone architecture dating back to around 9,600 BCE, constructed by people who were supposedly still hunter-gatherers. Massive T-shaped pillars carved with animals and abstract symbols, arranged in circles buried deliberately. A temple before farming, ritual before settlement, intention before necessity. Why bury something so monumental? The official explanations speak of social transformation, of symbolic closure, of shifting belief systems. Yet the act itself feels like an ending, a sealing, as if something was being hidden not only from enemies, but from time. And then there is the ice. During the Younger Dryas, approximately 12,900 years ago, the Earth experienced a sudden return to near-glacial conditions after a period of warming. Temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere dropped dramatically within decades. Megafauna disappeared. Ecosystems shifted violently. Some researchers have proposed that a comet impact, or airburst events, may have triggered the abrupt climate reversal, citing unusual concentrations of platinum and microspherules in sediment layers across multiple continents. Others dispute this, attributing the cooling to disruptions in ocean circulation. Regardless of cause, the event remains one of the most abrupt climate anomalies in Earth's recent history. It marks a rupture. If there had been coastal settlements prior to this event, they would now lie submerged. Sea levels during the last glacial maximum were more than 120 meters lower than today. Entire continental shelves, now drowned, were once habitable plains. Doggerland once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Sundaland once extended Southeast Asia into a vast tropical landmass. These are not myths. They are mapped geological realities. Civilization, as it is currently defined, depends heavily on what survives above water and above sediment. Stone, pottery, written records. But what if the earliest experiments in social complexity occurred along coastlines that are now lost? What if the first cities were built not in river valleys that remain visible, but along fertile shores that vanished beneath rising seas? And what if, in polar regions that were once more temperate than we imagine, something was built before the ice thickened? Antarctica was not always a frozen desert. Geological evidence confirms that parts of it were once forested. Fossilized tree stumps and pollen grains indicate warmer climates millions of years ago. That is deep time, far earlier than humanity. Yet even within the last 100,000 years, ice sheets have advanced and retreated in complex rhythms. Beneath the Antarctic ice today lie mountain ranges, valleys and subglacial lakes such as Lake Vostok. Liquid water sealed under kilometres of ice, isolated for possibly millions of years. When satellites began mapping gravitational anomalies beneath the ice, they revealed landscapes no human eye had ever seen. Hidden river channels, submerged ridges, entire terrains sculpted by forces long forgotten. Some independent researchers have speculated, carefully, sometimes controversially, about geometric patterns detected in radar surveys. Mainstream glaciologists caution against overinterpretation. Natural formations can appear symmetrical. Pareidolia is a powerful thing, yet the human mind remains uneasy when patterns echo intention. Is it unreasonable to wonder whether something else lies beneath those layers? Ice preserves. It locks organic material in suspended animation. Mammoths emerge from Siberian permafrost with flesh intact. Ancient viruses have been revived from frozen soil. If wood, bone and tissue can endure for tens of thousands of years in frozen ground, what of stone structures encased in ice? What of artifacts entombed in glaciers? The assumption that civilization must align neatly with the Holocene epoch, the stable climatic period of the last 11,700 years, may reflect more about our current data limits than about absolute truth. Archaeology is constrained by accessibility. We excavate where we can dig. We theorize based on what we can reach. But ice is patient. The Greenland ice cores reveal atmospheric conditions stretching back over 100,000 years. They show abrupt shifts, violent swings, rapid recoveries. Humanity, as a species, is at least 300,000 years old. For most of that time, we imagine small bands of hunter-gatherers moving across landscapes shaped by ice. Yet the cognitive capacity for symbolic thought, art, and possibly complex social structures existed long before agriculture. Cave paintings in places like Chauvet in France date back over 30,000 years. They display perspective, movement, intention. There is no clumsiness in their execution. They feel fully formed, as if art did not evolve gradually, but appeared already sophisticated. What else appeared fully formed? The Sumerian king list speaks of rulers reigning for impossibly long spans before a great flood. Myth, certainly. Symbolic exaggeration, most likely. Yet flood narratives persist across cultures: Mesopotamian, biblical, Mesoamerican, South Asian. They echo with unusual consistency. A world before, a deluge, a reset. Resets imply something to reset. Climate science acknowledges multiple abrupt climate events during the Pleistocene. Rapid meltwater pulses, sudden glacial collapses. If complex societies had formed in fragile ecological niches, coastal or temperate corridors, they could have been erased swiftly and thoroughly. The ice would not discriminate between advanced and primitive. It would simply fall. There is an unsettling humility in recognizing how narrow our archaeological window truly is. 12,000 years of stable climate have allowed agriculture, cities, metallurgy, writing. But before that stability, the world was volatile, and volatility does not favor preservation. The question is not whether advanced global empires thrived beneath the ice. There is no credible evidence for such claims. The question is subtler. Could localized experiments in organized society, ritual centers, proto-urban settlements, symbolic networks, have existed before the younger Dryas and been erased by climate upheaval? Some researchers point to megalithic structures aligned with astronomical events, suggesting continuity of sky knowledge far older than currently accepted chronologies. Others caution against projecting backward. The debate continues in quiet academic corridors, yet the ice remains. In Antarctica, beneath kilometres of compressed snowfall, entire landscapes lie unseen. In Greenland, radar penetrates frozen depths and reveals ancient river systems. In Siberia, permafrost yields bones and tools from deep time. The Earth does not reveal everything at once, it releases fragments. Perhaps the greatest misconception is that history is linear. It may be cyclical or fractured, or layered, like the ice itself, each era pressing down upon the last, distorting memory. And if somewhere beneath those frozen archives lies a trace, a foundation stone, a carved symbol, an anomaly not yet recognized, would we be prepared to see it? Or would it be dismissed as coincidence, as error, as noise within data? The layers are thick, the silence is heavy, but ice remembers what wind forgets. If the first civilization left even the faintest mark before the world shifted and froze, then its story is not gone, it is waiting. And the question lingers quietly in the cold. When the ice begins to melt again, what will rise with it? If the ice remembers, then what exactly does it remember? And what does it refuse to reveal? The unease left hanging in the cold, at the end of that question, is not about fantasy cities beneath Antarctica, nor about dramatic revelations waiting for satellites to confirm them. It is quieter than that. It is about absence, about the unsettling gaps between what survives and what should have survived. Consider how fragile even our modern civilization truly is. Steel corrodes, concrete fractures, glass shatters. If abandoned, cities decay with astonishing speed. Within centuries, forests reclaim suburbs. Within millennia, erosion grinds monuments into anonymous stone. The geological record is ruthless. It does not care for narrative continuity. Archaeologists sometimes speak of the preservation bias. We build stories based on what endures, not on what existed. Organic materials vanish. Coastlines shift. Entire valleys sink under sediment. In this sense, history is not written by victors. It is curated by physics. During the last glacial maximum, around 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, massive ice sheets covered much of North America and northern Europe. The Laurentide ice sheet alone was kilometers thick. Its weight depressed the crust of the Earth, altering drainage systems and river paths. When it melted, it reshaped continents. Proglacial lakes formed and burst. Meltwater pulses raised sea levels in dramatic surges. Meltwater Pulse 1A, occurring roughly 14,600 years ago, may have raised global sea levels by as much as 20 meters in less than 500 years. That is not a myth. That is sediment data and coral reef dating. Imagine coastal settlements, if any existed, watching the horizon creep closer year after year. Not as a sudden apocalyptic wave, but as an inexorable swallowing. The oldest widely recognized city, Jericho, dates back roughly 10,000 years. Çatalhöyük appears around 7,500 BCE. Mesopotamian urban centers emerge several millennia later. The timeline feels compact, compressed tightly into the stable Holocene climate. Yet Göbekli Tepe remains an anomaly. Its construction predates agriculture by centuries. Massive limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons were quarried and transported by groups we still label as hunter-gatherers. The site was intentionally buried around 8,000 BCE. Some scholars interpret this burial as ritual closure. Others see it as social transformation. But burial has another implication: preservation. The people who built Göbekli Tepe understood something about time. They sealed their work. They encased it deliberately. That act feels almost like a message to the future. Was it fear of destruction? Or reverence? Or an awareness that climates shift and memory dissolves? Ice does not require intention to preserve. It simply accumulates. In Greenland, ice core data reveals rapid temperature oscillations during the Pleistocene. Some shifts occurred within mere decades. Such abrupt changes would destabilize food sources, migration routes, and ecosystems. Human groups would be forced to adapt or disperse. Anthropologists often emphasize mobility as a defining trait of Paleolithic societies. Yet mobility does not exclude complexity. trade networks existed tens of thousands of years ago. Obsidian tools found hundreds of kilometers from their volcanic sources demonstrate exchange systems. Symbolic artifacts such as beads and carved figurines appear long before farming. The cognitive leap necessary for complex symbolic communication predates agriculture by tens of millennia. The so-called Upper Paleolithic Revolution introduced art, ritual burial, and technological sophistication around 40,000 years ago. Something in the human mind ignited long before cities rose. If intelligence and symbolic thought were already present, why assume social complexity waited patiently for climate stability? The counter-argument is practical. Agriculture supports population density. Population density supports specialization. Specialization supports urbanism. It is a clean progression, but perhaps it is not the only pathway. Marine archaeologists have identified submerged structures off the coast of India near the Gulf of Kambat. Some interpret sonar images as remnants of ancient settlements. Critics argue the formations are natural geological features. Radiocarbon dating of recovered artifacts remains debated. The controversy persists. Similarly, off the coast of Japan, the Oniguni Monument presents stepped formations beneath the sea. Some researchers claim artificial origin, others insist on natural sandstone fracturing. The tension between pattern recognition and geological explanation remains unresolved. These cases do not prove lost civilizations. They reveal something subtler. Our threshold for certainty is delicate. Underwater archaeology is still in its infancy compared to terrestrial excavation. Vast areas of continental shelf remain unexplored. Sea level rise since the last glacial maximum submerged territories that may have hosted early human communities. Not empires, not skyscrapers, but organized groups experimenting with structure, ritual, perhaps even proto-architecture. The younger Dryas impact hypothesis, though contested, introduces another dimension. If fragments of a comet or asteroid detonated in the atmosphere or struck ice sheets, the resulting wildfires and climatic disruption could have been catastrophic. Nanodiamonds and platinum anomalies found at certain sediment layers have fueled debate. Many scientists remain skeptical, yet the possibility lingers in peer-reviewed journals. Human memory often encodes trauma in myth. Flood stories are rarely about gentle rains. They speak of wrathful skies and cosmic resets. In Mesopotamian epics, divine councils decide humanity's fate. In the biblical narrative, waters cleanse corruption. In Mesoamerican traditions, previous worlds perish before a new sun rises. Myth does not serve as literal record, but it may echo environmental memory. If coastal societies were erased by rapid sea level rise, survivors moving inland would carry fragments of memory. Stories of drowned lands, of ancestors swallowed by water. Over generations, these memories crystallize into narrative. Ice, meanwhile, thickens in silence. In Antarctica, radar mapping has revealed subglacial lakes connected by hidden waterways. Lake Vostok, buried under nearly 4 kilometers of ice, has been isolated for perhaps 15 million years. The idea of life surviving in darkness beneath ice has reshaped our understanding of extremophils and of potential habitats on icy moons like Europa. If ecosystems can persist unseen for geological timescales, human artifacts might endure for shorter spans beneath ice sheets. There are no credible findings of ancient cities under Antarctica. That must be stated plainly. Yet the continent was once positioned differently in deep time. Plate tectonics reminds us that Earth's geography is not fixed. Antarctica was once part of Gondwana. Forests grew there in distant eras, but even within the last 100,000 years, ice coverage has fluctuated regionally. Could peripheral regions have been ice-free during warmer interstadials? Paleoclimate data suggests complexity, though not temperate paradises. The more pressing question may not concern Antarctica specifically, but the broader polar and subpolar regions during transitional climates. Human groups migrated astonishing distances. Evidence of early humans in Siberia stretches back tens of thousands of years. The Denisovans inhabited harsh environments long before modern humans reached similar latitudes. The archaeological record is thin in extreme climates, not because humans were absent, but because preservation and accessibility are limited. When permafrost thaws, it sometimes reveals astonishing things: woven textiles, wooden tools, even footprints frozen in ancient mud. These discoveries are accidental gifts of warming. What else lies sealed in frozen strata, undisturbed because no one has yet drilled precisely there? The difficulty is epistemological. Science relies on evidence. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but neither is it proof of presence. The space between those two truths is where speculation breathes. And yet the human story feels incomplete, not wrong, not fraudulent, but perhaps partial. We speak confidently of the cradle of civilization, as if cradles are singular. But humanity did not evolve in one valley. It dispersed across continents long before farming anchored it. It painted caves in France, carved figurines in Germany, navigated coastlines in Southeast Asia, and crossed into Australia over 60,000 years ago. Ocean crossings imply boats. Boats imply planning. Planning implies social coordination. Coordination leaves little trace in stone. If Ice Age layers conceal traces of early social experiments, we may never find them intact. They would be fragmented, ambiguous, contested. A stone alignment here, a submerged wall there, a myth echoing from multiple continents. The danger lies not in believing too much, but in dismissing too quickly. The ice is not romantic, it is indifferent. It records volcanic eruptions and solar cycles without bias. It traps ancient air without agenda. But humans, interpreting those layers, bring narrative hunger, and hunger can distort. Still, as satellites map deeper and drilling technology advances, new data will emerge. Not dramatic revelations, but incremental shifts. A layer redated, a coastline reconstructed differently, a submerged valley mapped with unexpected precision. History rarely shouts, it whispers through anomalies. If the first civilization, however modest, rose briefly during a window of climatic stability before the younger Dryas, and if it was erased by rising seas or encroaching ice, then its legacy would be faint. Not pyramids, not empires. Perhaps only memory encoded in myth and scattered stone. The ice continues to press downward, patient as gravity. And beneath that weight, beneath layers older than writing, older than agriculture, older even than our certainty about ourselves, something may persist, not as proof but as possibility. What happens when possibility is finally exposed to air? What happens when possibility is finally exposed to air, and the air itself begins to change? There is a quiet irony in the fact that the very process threatening modern coastlines, melting ice, is also the process that may one day reveal what has been hidden. Glaciers retreat, permafrost softens, ancient ground exhales for the first time in millennia. In Siberia, hunters have stumbled upon the preserved bodies of woolly mammoths, their tusks curved like frozen crescents. In the Yukon, gold miners uncovered the preserved remains of a wolf pup dated to over 57,000 years ago, its fur intact, its small body curled as if merely asleep. Ice does not merely erase, it keeps. The question that lingers is not whether ice can preserve life, but whether it can preserve intention. Stone tools survive because they are durable. Bones endure when conditions allow. But architecture requires context. A wall alone is not a city. A foundation stone alone is not proof of organised society. Archaeology depends on patterns, clusters of artefacts, alignments, cultural layers that speak collectively rather than individually. If an early society had formed in a region later swallowed by ice or sea, The surviving fragments would be sparse and easily misinterpreted. A single carved stone might be dismissed as an anomaly. A geometric alignment might be explained by geological processes. The burden of proof is high, and rightly so. Yet the Earth has revealed strange things before. In 1991, hikers in the Ötztal Alps discovered a body protruding from melting ice. At first assumed to be a recent victim of exposure, the man was later dated to approximately 3,300 BCE. Ötzi, the Iceman, carried tools, clothing, and even remnants of his last meal preserved within him. His discovery reshaped understanding of Copper Age Europe. It was not that scholars denied such individuals existed, it was that preservation had concealed them. What if there are deeper layers still concealed? The Pleistocene epoch was not a uniform deep freeze. It oscillated between glacial and interglacial periods. During warmer interglacials, ice sheets retreated significantly. Forests advanced northward. Human populations expanded into new territories. These cycles occurred repeatedly over hundreds of thousands of years. Modern Homo sapiens emerged in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. By 70,000 years ago, small groups had begun dispersing beyond the continent. By 40,000 years ago, they occupied vast stretches of Eurasia. Their cognitive sophistication is evident in art, burial practices, and tool diversity. It is easy to assume that complexity steadily increased toward the Holocene. But evolutionary capacity does not necessarily correlate with linear social development. Human potential has long existed. The constraints were environmental. During periods of relative climatic stability, even within the Pleistocene, localized regions may have supported more sedentary lifestyles. Archaeological evidence from Ohalo II in Israel, dated to around 23,000 years ago, reveals huts, plant remains, and grinding stones. These people were not merely wandering randomly, they organized space and processed food systematically. Such sites hint at experimentation, small steps towards stability, perhaps interrupted by shifting climates. When ice advances, it grinds. Glaciers are not gentle blankets. They scour bedrock, crush forests, and rearrange landscapes. Any surface structure in their path would be obliterated or dragged beyond recognition. The Laurentide ice sheet reshaped North America so thoroughly that its prior topography is difficult to reconstruct without geological modelling. If early human communities existed along its southern fringes during interstadials, their remains would be deeply buried or destroyed. Then there are regions that were never glaciated but were affected indirectly. Meltwater floods carved channels through central North America, forming the channeled scablands of Washington state. For decades, geologist J. Harlan Bretz's hypothesis of catastrophic flooding was ridiculed before eventually accepted. The land itself held evidence of violence that traditional gradualist models could not explain. Scientific consensus evolves. It does not do so easily. The Younger Dryas remains one of the most debated climatic episodes in recent geological history. Some sediment cores suggest widespread wildfires at its onset. Pollen records reveal abrupt ecological transitions. Whether triggered by extraterrestrial impact or ocean circulation shifts, the disruption was severe. If small, organized communities existed in vulnerable zones, river deltas, coastal plains, they would have faced cascading failures. Crops would fail, game patterns would shift, sea levels would rise unevenly. Survivors would migrate inland or perish. Migration fragments, continuity. Oral traditions adapt to new landscapes. Memory compresses. There is something deeply human about the urge to anchor identity in antiquity. Many civilizations trace their origins to mythical golden ages lost to catastrophe. Plato's account of Atlantis, described in the dialogues Timaeus and Critias, speaks of a powerful society destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. Most scholars interpret the story as allegory, possibly inspired by the eruption of Thera or other ancient events. Yet the persistence of such motifs suggests psychological resonance. Catastrophe is reset. Civilization is fragile. It is tempting to project modern anxieties backward, to imagine advanced technologies buried under ice. That is not where the evidence leads. There are no verified findings of industrial-era artifacts predating the Holocene. The notion of a globally advanced pre-Ice Age civilization remains unsupported, but the absence of skyscrapers does not preclude the possibility of organized, symbolically rich societies that did not leave behind monumental stone. The earliest known monumental architecture emerges suddenly in the archaeological record. Göbekli Tepe appears sophisticated from its inception. There is no obvious developmental phase visible nearby. Its creators possessed not only engineering skill, but symbolic coherence. The pillars feature consistent iconography, perhaps reflecting shared cosmology. Shared cosmology requires communication networks. Where did those networks originate? How long did they take to form? Ice core data from Greenland reveals that climate can shift drastically within human lifespans. The Dansgaard-Oeschger events demonstrate temperature increases of up to 8 degrees Celsius within decades during the last glacial period. Rapid warming followed by instability would destabilize ecosystems unpredictably. In such volatile environments, experimentation with settlement might be risky but necessary. Groups may have gathered seasonally at ritual sites, reinforcing social bonds against environmental uncertainty. Such gatherings leave subtle traces, hearths, post holes, fragments of carved stone. If those traces lay in regions later submerged or glaciated, our access to them is nearly impossible without targeted exploration. Technological advances now allow for more sophisticated subglacial mapping. Ice-penetrating radar reveals bedrock topography with increasing precision. Satellite gravimetry detects mass variations beneath ice sheets. These tools are designed to understand climate and geology, not to hunt for lost civilizations. Yet they expand our capacity to see beneath surfaces once considered impenetrable. The danger, as always, lies in overinterpretation. Patterns can be seductive, but skepticism must coexist with curiosity. Permafrost thaw in Arctic regions has begun to reveal preserved human footprints dating back over 10,000 years. In White Sands, New Mexico, fossilized footprints suggest human presence in North America as early as 21,000 to 23,000 years ago, predating the widely accepted Clovis culture timeline. This discovery challenged long-held assumptions about migration routes and timing. It did not rewrite all of history, but it adjusted the margins. Margins matter. If human presence in the Americas predates established timelines, what else remains hidden beneath sediment and ice? What narratives are constrained not by impossibility, but by incomplete data? The idea of a first civilization may itself be misleading. Civilization may not have a singular origin point. It may have flickered repeatedly into different forms, extinguished by environmental upheaval, before stabilizing in the Holocene. Not empires, not global networks, but structured communities experimenting with ritual, astronomy, seasonal gathering, perhaps even proto-agriculture. Such societies would leave faint archaeological signatures, and if those signatures lie beneath kilometers of ice or meters of ocean sediment, they may remain invisible for centuries more. As the planet warms again, reluctantly and dangerously, new ground is exposed. Archaeologists in melting alpine regions race to recover artifacts before they decay. Each discovery is both revelation and warning. The ice is not only archive, it is threshold. When thresholds shift, memory emerges, but not always intact. Fragments rise, questions multiply. And as scientists refine dating techniques and mapping tools, the edges of certainty may shift slightly further outward. If the first stirrings of organized human society occurred during a fragile window before climatic collapse, then their story is not entirely erased. It is dispersed across myth, across submerged plains, across frozen sediment. The possibility does not demand belief. It invites patience. Beneath the weight of ice, beneath the compression of millennia, Beneath layers of skepticism and longing, there may exist not a lost empire, but a lost beginning, and beginnings are harder to recognize than ruins. Beginnings are rarely dramatic. They do not announce themselves with monuments or inscriptions. They are subtle shifts, an alignment of stones toward a rising star, a gathering that becomes seasonal, a symbol repeated often enough to suggest shared meaning. If such beginnings flickered during the long ice age, they would not resemble the cities we imagine. They would be fragile, provisional, deeply intertwined with landscape. There is a tendency to equate civilization with scale, walls, roads, written law, centralized authority. Yet complexity can exist without permanence. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have documented intricate social structures, trade networks spanning hundreds of kilometers, and sophisticated cosmologies encoded in ritual. Mobility does not negate organization, it simply changes its form. During the Pleistocene, vast regions of Eurasia and North America were steppes, cold, dry grasslands supporting megafauna. Humans followed herds, but following does not imply randomness. Campsites were chosen strategically. Resources were mapped mentally across seasons. Memory was geographic. In certain areas, evidence suggests repeated occupation of the same sites over thousands of years. This repetition hints at territorial familiarity and perhaps even sacred continuity. A place returned to again and again becomes more than shelter. It becomes anchor. Consider the mammoth bone dwellings discovered in Ukraine, dating back approximately 15,000 to 20,000 years. Circular structures constructed from the remains of large animals, arranged deliberately, sometimes with hearths at their centre. These were not temporary windbreaks. They required coordination, planning, labour. Were they cities? No. But they demonstrate that even in glacial landscapes, humans shaped space intentionally. Now imagine a region at the edge of an ice sheet during a warmer interstadial. Forests expanding, rivers running strong with meltwater, game abundant, a semi-permanent settlement emerging near a fertile plain. Over generations, seasonal gatherings evolve into structured rituals. Astronomical observation becomes embedded in communal identity. The sky during the Pleistocene was the same sky we see now, though its constellations shifted slowly with precession. Tracking stars would not have required agriculture, only curiosity and continuity. Some researchers have proposed that ancient myths preserved knowledge of astronomical cycles far older than written record. The work of scholars such as Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Dechenne suggested that precession of the equinoxes may be encoded symbolically in global mythologies. Their interpretations remain debated, criticised for overreach. Yet the possibility that sky knowledge predates formal civilization is difficult to dismiss entirely. Göbekli Tepe's pillars feature animal motifs that some interpret as celestial representations. Others argue they reflect terrestrial fauna significant to local cosmology. The debate continues. But what remains undeniable is that its builders possess symbolic sophistication, not easily explained by subsistence necessity alone. If ritual architecture emerged before agriculture, then the seed of civilization may have been spiritual rather than economic. Ice would not preserve wood or fibre structures well under crushing pressure, but stone circles, if small and scattered, might be indistinguishable from natural formations once displaced by glacial movement. The problem is scale. We search for evidence of cities. We may need to search for evidence of convergence, sites where disparate groups gathered repeatedly over centuries. Sea levels during glacial periods exposed continental shelves that are now submerged. These shelves would have been among the most resource-rich environments available. Estuaries teeming with fish, coastal plains rich in plant life. Humans are coastal creatures by instinct. Marine resources provide stable food supplies compared to unpredictable inland hunting. If early semi-sedentary communities formed along such coasts, rising seas would have drowned them entirely. The sediment accumulation over thousands of years would conceal foundations deeply. Underwater archaeology has only begun to scratch these submerged landscapes. The Black Sea flood hypothesis, proposed by William Ryan and Walter Pittman, suggested a rapid inundation of the Black Sea basin around 7,600 years ago due to Mediterranean overflow. The theory has been both supported and challenged by subsequent data. Whether sudden or gradual, regional flooding events have occurred repeatedly in human prehistory. Inundation reshapes memory. In India, submerged ruins near Dwarka have been cited by some as evidence of ancient urban centres predating known timelines. Archaeological consensus remains cautious, emphasising the need for rigorous dating and context. Yet the idea that coastal cities may have existed earlier than documented is not inherently unreasonable. It is methodologically difficult to prove. The Antarctic ice sheet, while extreme, is not the only frozen archive. Arctic permafrost covers vast stretches of Siberia, Alaska, and Canada. Within these frozen soils, organic material can persist astonishingly well. Wooden artefacts, textiles, even human remains can survive in low oxygen, low temperature environments. As global temperatures rise, permafrost thaw accelerates. Archaeologists race against time to recover artefacts before decay sets in. Each summer reveals new fragments of ancient lives. In 2021, footprints discovered at White Sands National Park were dated to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago, using radiocarbon analysis of seeds embedded in sediment layers. This finding suggests human presence in North America during the height of the last glacial maximum, challenging the long-held Clovis first model. Not everyone agrees on the interpretation, but the evidence has forced reconsideration. Reconsideration is not revolution. It is adjustment. If humans were present in regions previously considered uninhabitable, then our understanding of adaptability must expand. Adaptability opens the door to social experimentation even under harsh climates. Yet experimentation does not guarantee survival. The late Pleistocene witnessed extinctions of megafauna across multiple continents. The causes remain debated: climate change, human overhunting, or a combination of both. Ecological collapse would strain any structured society dependent on specific species. Imagine a community built around seasonal megafauna migration patterns. If those migrations ceased abruptly, social coherence might fracture, ritual centres abandoned, structures left incomplete, memory scattered among survivors moving into unfamiliar terrain. Over time, stories of abundance would become myths of golden ages. It is easy to romanticize a lost first civilization, but perhaps its fragility is precisely what makes it plausible. Not an advanced technological society, but a delicate network of communities testing permanence in a world not yet stable enough to sustain it. Glacial ice would not discriminate between the humble and the grand. It would press downward, compressing soil, grinding stone, reshaping rivers. What was once a gathering place could become indistinguishable from bedrock. When the ice retreated, landscapes would appear reborn, new rivers carved, new forests grown. The memory of what stood before erased not by conspiracy but by physics, and yet the human mind resists discontinuity. It seeks lineage. The Sumerians spoke of kings before a flood. Mesoamerican texts describe previous suns destroyed. Norse mythology tells of cycles ending in Ragnarok before renewal. These narratives are separated by oceans and millennia, yet they share structural resemblance. Scholars caution against drawing direct historical conclusions from myth, but myth as psychological echo remains compelling. If a small, organised society existed before climatic catastrophe, if it had begun to coalesce around ritual, astronomy, seasonal permanence, its destruction would leave trauma disproportionate to its size. Survivors would not speak of huts lost to erosion. They would speak of a world ended. Ice layers accumulate without drama. But beneath them perhaps lie not ruins of empire, but whispers of attempts to remain, attempts to gather, attempts to carve meaning into stone before the sky shifted. The deeper question is not whether such beginnings occurred. It is whether we are prepared to accept that civilization may have more than one genesis and more than one grave. If the first experiment in permanence failed under ice and rising seas, then our current stability may be less assured than we believe, and somewhere beneath frozen ground or drowned shelf, beneath sediment pressed tight by centuries, the outline of that first fragile gathering may still wait, not intact, not triumphant, but quietly present, waiting not to be proven, but to be recognized. Recognition is a delicate act. It requires not only evidence, but the willingness to see what evidence suggests without forcing it into familiar frames. When archaeologists brush away sediment, they are not simply uncovering objects, they are confronting assumptions about continuity. Every artifact disrupts certainty just slightly, nudging timelines forward or backward, widening or narrowing what we believe to be possible. If there was a first experiment in permanence before the end of the Ice Age, it would not announce itself clearly. It would appear as an anomaly, something just slightly older than expected, slightly more sophisticated than the prevailing model allows. Not impossible, just inconvenient. Consider the site of Karahan Tepe, located not far from Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Excavations there have revealed carved pillars and subterranean chambers of comparable age, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated occurrence. It was part of a broader cultural horizon. A network of sites sharing symbolic architecture long before agriculture took hold. This network implies coordination, shared ideas, perhaps even pilgrimage. If such networks existed at the threshold of the Holocene, it raises an unsettling question. How long had they been forming before they became visible to us? Archaeology often reveals the moment something becomes materially undeniable, not the moment it began. There is also the matter of stone itself. Megalithic construction appears in various parts of the world thousands of years later, in Britain, in Malta, in the Levant, in parts of Asia. While separated by time and geography, these structures share certain thematic elements: alignment with celestial bodies, circular forms, ritual orientation. Independent invention is plausible. Humans everywhere gaze at the sky, but the recurrence of astronomical alignment in sacred architecture suggests that watching the heavens is among our oldest shared impulses. During the Ice Age, the sky would have been stark and brilliant, unobscured by modern light pollution. The Milky Way would stretch across the night in overwhelming clarity. For communities seeking pattern in chaos, the stars offered permanence. If early gatherings centered around seasonal celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, heliacal risings, then their architecture might have been aligned accordingly. Yet alignment alone does not prove civilization. It suggests intention. Ice, once again, complicates preservation. In regions glaciated repeatedly over millennia, any modest stone alignments could have been displaced, fractured, or buried beneath till. What remains visible today is what survived outside the grinding path. There is a curious gap in human chronology. Anatomically, modern humans appear roughly 300,000 years ago. Behavioral modernity, art, symbolic burial, complex tools, appears tens of thousands of years later. Then, for tens of millennia, we see little evidence of large-scale architecture, and suddenly, near the end of the Ice Age, monumental stone structures appear. Why then? The standard explanation is demographic. As populations increased during favourable climates, social complexity expanded. Larger groups required structured ritual to maintain cohesion. Monumental architecture served as social glue. This explanation is reasonable, yet it rests heavily on the assumption that earlier attempts did not occur, or if they did, they left no trace. The archaeological record is biased toward what resists decay. Wood, earthworks, woven structures, these vanish easily unless preserved in extraordinary conditions. If pre-Holocene communities experimented with architecture primarily using organic materials, the evidence would be almost entirely erased unless frozen. And frozen environments, by their nature, conceal. In Siberia's Yana River region, evidence of human occupation dating back approximately 31,000 years suggests that people adapted to Arctic conditions far earlier than once believed. These inhabitants crafted tools from mammoth ivory and stone, navigated harsh climates, and organized survival strategies in extreme cold. Adaptation implies resilience. Resilience implies organization. Yet organization does not always translate to monumental expression. The Bering Land Bridge, now submerged beneath the Bering Strait, once connected Asia and North America. During lower sea levels, it formed a vast grassland corridor known as Beringia. For thousands of years, human populations may have inhabited this region before dispersing southward. What traces remain beneath the waters now covering Beringia? Sediment cores and sonar mapping offer glimpses of ancient landscapes, but systematic excavation remains limited. Submerged landscapes represent perhaps the greatest blind spot in archaeology. Continental shelves are difficult and expensive to explore. Technology advances slowly relative to the scale of what lies hidden. If the first organized settlements arose near coasts during a warmer Pleistocene interstadial, rising seas would have erased their footprints. Survivors migrating inland would carry knowledge, perhaps encoded in myth or ritual practice, but the physical origin would be gone. Flood myths across cultures often describe not only destruction, but preservation of knowledge, an ark, a chosen survivor, a lineage protected. The Epic of Gilgamesh recounts Utnapishtim surviving a divine flood by constructing a vessel. The biblical Noah echoes similar themes. In Hindu tradition, Manu survives a deluge guided by a fish avatar. These narratives share a structural memory of continuity amid rupture. Scholars debate whether they reflect a single historical flood event or archetypal storytelling, but they reveal an enduring anxiety about loss. Loss is central to the Ice Age narrative. Massive ice sheets advanced and retreated repeatedly over hundreds of thousands of years. Human populations adapted, migrated, and persisted. If there were localized nodes of early complexity, proto-urban clusters, ritual hubs, coastal semi-permanent settlements, they would have been vulnerable to rapid environmental shifts. A few decades of climatic instability could dismantle generations of gradual organization. And dismantling does not leave clean archaeological signatures. It leaves gaps. Modern glaciology shows that ice sheets can respond non-linearly to warming. Once thresholds are crossed, retreat accelerates. Meltwater channels form beneath ice, lubricating its movement. Entire sections can collapse suddenly. If such collapses occurred during the Pleistocene, they could have triggered regional flooding or dramatic landscape alteration. It is not necessary to imagine a technologically advanced Ice Age empire to appreciate the scale of disruption possible. Even modest, symbolically rich communities would have struggled to survive such volatility. There is also the question of time perception. To a community living seasonally, 500 years is vast. To geology, it is negligible. A civilization lasting several centuries before being erased by climate would barely register in sedimentary record, especially if located in vulnerable terrain. The Holocene offered relative stability. Stable climate fosters agriculture. Agriculture anchors population. Anchored population builds stone. We may be mistaking the first preserved civilization for the first attempted one, and if so, then beneath layers of ice and drowned coastlines may lie not the remains of a golden age, but evidence of a rehearsal interrupted. As ice continues to retreat in modern times, archaeologists recover artifacts from alpine glaciers, ancient arrows, leather shoes, woven cords. Each discovery is accidental, revealed by thaw. What if deeper revelations require not only thaw, but patience measured in generations? What if our current technological tools are still insufficient to detect the faintest traces beneath compressed strata? The question is not whether we have been lied to. There is no grand conspiracy necessary. Ignorance can be natural, emerging from limits of access and preservation. But limits can shift. As radar penetrates deeper, as submersible technology improves, as climate models refine our understanding of ancient shorelines, the margins of possibility expand incrementally. If the first civilization flickered briefly during an unstable Ice Age interlude, structured, symbolic, perhaps even semi-sedentary, it may not have left monuments tall enough to survive glaciers. It may have left only whispers, buried alignments, submerged foundations, myths of water and cold. Recognition will not come as revelation. It will come as subtle revision, and when revision arrives, it will not shout that history was wrong. It will merely suggest that history was incomplete. Incomplete stories are not lies. They are invitations. Beneath ice, beneath silt, beneath the patient compression of time, the first attempt at permanence may still rest, unaware of our search, indifferent to our certainty. Waiting not for validation but for thaw. Thaw is never immediate. It begins invisibly, with a subtle shift in temperature, a quiet loosening beneath the surface. The upper crust softens first, then deeper layers follow. What was rigid becomes unstable. What was sealed begins to breathe. In this slow transformation, the Earth reveals something profound. Preservation and erasure are never final states. They are phases. If Ice Age layers conceal the faint outlines of an early civilization, then the act of melting is not merely geological. It becomes archaeological. It becomes philosophical. The question shifts from whether something existed to whether we are capable of perceiving its residue without distorting it. Consider the discovery of the Denisovans. For decades, the human story seemed relatively linear. Neanderthals in Europe, Homo sapiens emerging in Africa, a gradual replacement across continents. Then, in a Siberian cave, a fragment of finger bone and a few teeth revealed a previously unknown human lineage through DNA analysis. There were no grand monuments announcing their presence, just genetic memory hidden in fossil fragments. An entire branch of humanity, invisible in the traditional archaeological record, revealed through molecular trace. If a distinct human lineage could remain undetected until recently, what does that suggest about cultural traces even more fragile than bone? Genetic studies now show that modern humans carry Denisovan DNA, particularly in populations across Asia and Oceania. This implies interaction, exchange, perhaps coexistence. Yet the material culture of Denisovans remains sparse and debated. Their existence was confirmed not through architecture, but through microscopic evidence. The Ice Age was not merely a backdrop to human evolution. It was an active force shaping movement, interaction, and survival strategies. Ice corridors opened and closed, land bridges appeared and vanished, populations were isolated then reunited. Isolation fosters innovation, it also fosters divergence. In such dynamic landscapes, small complex communities could have formed in ecological refugia, pockets of relative warmth or stability amid broader cold. Paleoclimatic reconstructions indicate that even during glacial maxima, certain regions remained habitable. Southern Europe, parts of the Near East, coastal East Asia, these refuges supported sustained human presence. Within refuges, continuity was possible. Continuity allows memory to deepen. Memory allows tradition to stabilize. Stability need not be absolute to permit organization. It only needs to persist long enough for patterns to form. Archaeological layers often show repeated occupation separated by sterile strata, periods when a site was abandoned due to climatic stress. When conditions improved, humans returned. Sometimes the returning population bore little resemblance to those who came before, but occasionally artifacts suggest continuity. Tool styles echo earlier designs. Ritual practices persist in modified form. Such continuity across climate disruption hints at resilience. Yet resilience does not equate to permanence. The Younger Dryas cooling event remains one of the sharpest climatic reversals known. Evidence from Greenland ice cores shows temperature drops occurring within decades. For communities relying on predictable seasonal cycles, such rapid change would have been disorienting. It is not difficult to imagine that organised settlements, if any existed, would have fragmented under such stress. Ritual centres abandoned, trade routes severed, symbolic systems disrupted. Survivors would adapt, but adaptation often means simplification. In complexity theory, systems can collapse into simpler forms when overwhelmed by external shocks. This does not imply regression in intelligence, but restructuring of social organisation. If early experiments in sedentism or proto-urban gathering collapsed during climatic instability, the archaeological signature might resemble a return to mobility. From a distance of millennia, that shift would appear as absence. There is also the matter of epistemic caution. Modern science relies on falsifiability. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Without robust data, hypotheses remain speculative. But speculation grounded in environmental plausibility is not fantasy. It is inquiry. Marine geologists have mapped ancient river channels beneath the North Sea, remnants of Doggerland, once a vast plain connecting Britain to continental Europe. Artifacts dredged from the seabed include tools and bones dating back thousands of years. The landscape that once supported human life now lies submerged and largely unexplored. As sonar mapping improves, clearer reconstructions of paleo coastlines emerge. These reconstructions often reveal that prime habitable zones during glacial periods are now underwater. The problem is not that we refuse to look. It is that looking underwater is technologically demanding and financially limited. Antarctica remains a different category. It is not merely submerged, it is sealed. Ice thickness in some regions exceeds 4 kilometres. Beneath that ice lie mountain ranges, valleys and sedimentary basins. Some researchers studying subglacial geology focus on understanding past ice sheet dynamics. They analyse sediment cores drilled through ice to bedrock, searching for clues about past interglacials. Their goal is climate reconstruction, not lost cities. Yet occasionally unusual formations appear in radar data. Most are geological. Some remain ambiguous until further study clarifies them. Ambiguity is fertile ground for imagination. But imagination must remain tethered to evidence. There is no verified indication of advanced human structures beneath Antarctic ice. That remains clear. Still, Antarctica's geological history reminds us that the continent was once positioned differently. Hosting temperate forests millions of years ago, while far removed from human timelines, it demonstrates Earth's capacity for radical transformation. Transformation is central to this inquiry. If a first civilization arose during a narrow window of stability within the Ice Age, structured, symbolic, perhaps even modestly architectural, it would have existed within a world in flux. Flux does not favour endurance. The archaeological record tends to amplify the durable and mute the ephemeral. Stone temples survive, wooden gathering halls decay. We may be equating the birth of civilization with the first time humanity built in stone at scale. But what if the first civilization built in perishable materials, along coasts and riverbanks later erased? Permafrost thaw has recently revealed ancient dwellings and artifacts in Arctic regions. Each find expands understanding of early human adaptation. None reveal lost empires, but each complicates linear narratives. Complication is not contradiction. It is nuance. Nuance invites humility. If the first civilization lies hidden within Ice Age layers, it may never be uncovered as a complete entity. It may only appear as adjustments, earlier dates, unexpected site complexity, submerged anomalies that resist easy categorization. Recognition, then, is cumulative. It emerges not in headlines, but in footnotes, not in declarations, but in recalibrations. The deeper question remains unsettling. If organised human societies once formed and were erased by climatic forces beyond their control, what does that imply about our own permanence? Ice sheets advance slowly, until they do not. Sea levels rise gradually, until thresholds are crossed. Our era feels stable, but stability is historically rare. Perhaps the lesson concealed beneath Ice Age layers is not about forgotten glory, but about fragility. Fragility not as weakness, but as condition. The first attempt at permanence, if it existed, may have dissolved into migration and myth, not because it failed morally, but because climate shifted. And as modern glaciers retreat, exposing remnants of lives long buried, the Earth reminds us that preservation is temporary. Everything sealed will eventually surface. The only uncertainty is whether we will recognise what we see, or repeat what was once forgotten. Recognition depends on context. A single stone means little without the pattern that surrounds it. A fragment of bone is just bone until it is placed within a timeline, and timelines, as solid as they appear in textbooks, are built from layers that shift when new data presses against them. If Ice Age layers conceal traces of an early civilization, then the problem is not simply excavation, it is interpretation. What would such traces even look like? We imagine foundations, walls, roads, but perhaps the earlier structured societies would not have invested in durability. Perhaps their permanence was conceptual rather than architectural. Anthropological studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies reveal that complexity can be encoded in ritual rather than infrastructure. Songlines among Aboriginal Australians map entire landscapes through oral tradition. These narratives preserve ecological knowledge across generations without requiring written record or monumental stone, song as structure, memory as architecture. If early Ice Age communities relied on oral mapping rather than permanent buildings, their social sophistication would leave minimal physical trace, and when climate shifted, the songs might migrate, adapting to new terrain. There is also the question of population density. It is often assumed that significant social complexity requires large populations, yet certain Paleolithic sites suggest periodic congregation of groups for ritual or exchange. At Sungir in Russia, burials dating back around 34,000 years contain elaborate grave goods, thousands of ivory beads meticulously crafted. The labour required to produce these items suggests surplus time and coordinated effort. Symbolic investment of that scale implies more than survival. It implies meaning. Meaning can anchor community as powerfully as walls. If gatherings at ritual centres predated agriculture, they may have served as nodes of social cohesion. These nodes need not have been permanent cities. They could have been seasonal convergence points, temporary yet significant. Now imagine one such convergence point located near a coastline exposed during lower sea levels. For centuries, perhaps longer, groups return seasonally. They erect temporary structures, align markers with celestial events, share stories and trade goods. Then climate shifts. Sea levels rise steadily over generations. The convergence point becomes marshland, then shallow sea, then open water. The memory persists among survivors, but the physical anchor is gone. From an archaeological perspective, nothing remains above water to excavate. Underwater archaeology has revealed submerged prehistoric sites off the coasts of Israel, such as Atlit Yam, a Neolithic village now lying beneath the Mediterranean Sea. Dating to around 7000 BCE, it contains stone structures, wells, and human burials. It was not erased by ice, but by rising sea levels. If such settlements can vanish within documented Holocene timelines, how many earlier ones lie deeper, beneath thicker sediment? The Black Sea region offers another example. Core samples and sonar imaging have revealed ancient shorelines far from current coasts. While interpretations vary, There is clear evidence that human habitats once occupied areas now submerged. The concept of a first civilization may mislead by implying singularity and grandeur. It may have been plural and modest. Plural beginnings complicate narratives. Ice Age Europe offers glimpses of cultural sophistication in cave art. The paintings in Chauvet Cave, dating to approximately 30,000 years ago, display dynamic motion and layered composition. The artists were not experimenting clumsily. They were skilled. Skill suggests apprenticeship. Apprenticeship suggests structured learning. Structured learning requires social organization. These artists lived within glacial landscapes, yet their cognitive world was vibrant. If such cognitive complexity existed tens of thousands of years ago, the assumption that organized social experimentation only began in the Holocene becomes less certain. Still, the archaeological record between 40,000 and 12,000 years ago is dominated by mobile hunter-gatherer sites. There is no clear evidence of cities or large-scale infrastructure. But infrastructure may not be the correct measure. Complex adaptive systems often oscillate between phases of expansion and contraction. Small groups may coalesce into larger networks during favorable conditions, then fragment under stress. The Ice Age was characterized by climatic oscillations known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events. Rapid warming followed by cooling could occur within decades. These fluctuations would challenge any attempt at long-term settlement. Yet within each warm interlude, windows of stability opened. Windows may have been brief, but brief is relative. A few centuries of relative warmth could sustain multiple human generations, enough time to experiment with permanence. The younger Dryas, beginning around 12,900 years ago, interrupted a warming trend. For communities already transitioning toward more sedentary lifestyles, this abrupt cooling would have been destabilizing. Some researchers have suggested that the stress of younger Dryas conditions may have catalyzed innovation, driving the development of agriculture as a response to scarcity. If so, then agriculture may not have initiated civilization but rather salvaged it. Perhaps there were attempts at structured living before agriculture, undone by climate, then re-attempted under new conditions. The idea is not widely endorsed, nor is it dismissed outright. It lingers in the space between data and interpretation. There is also the matter of symbolic continuity. Certain motifs appear repeatedly across distant cultures. Serpents, floodwaters, cosmic trees, sky beings. Comparative mythology suggests archetypal themes embedded in human psychology. Some scholars argue these themes reflect universal cognitive patterns rather than shared historical memory. Others entertain the possibility of deep ancestral narratives passed down across migrations. If early Ice Age communities developed cosmologies in response to environmental volatility, those cosmologies might survive long after the communities themselves dissolved. Myth, unlike stone, migrates. Ice layers, meanwhile, continue to compress time into stratified silence. In Greenland, ice cores contain volcanic ash layers that can be matched to specific eruptions. This precision allows scientists to correlate climatic events globally. It also reveals how interconnected environmental systems are. A major eruption in one hemisphere can affect climate patterns worldwide. If Ice Age layers conceal traces of early social organization, then those traces exist within a broader planetary system prone to abrupt change. The fragility of early complexity becomes understandable. What remains uncertain is whether we are looking for the right evidence. Archaeology traditionally seeks durable artifacts, but early social networks might be detectable through isotopic analysis of human remains, revealing long-distance mobility patterns. They might be inferred through genetic diversity shifts indicating sustained interaction between groups. Already, ancient DNA studies have reshaped understanding of human migration. The picture is far more intricate than once believed. Intricacy implies interaction. Interaction implies structure. Structure implies coordination. And coordination is the seed of civilization. If that seed sprouted multiple times during the Ice Age, only to be withered by climate, then our current civilization may not be the first to attempt stability. It may be the first to succeed long enough to leave durable monuments. The difference between attempt and achievement can be geological. Under layers of ice and sediment, beneath drowned shelves and scoured plains, the earliest gatherings may rest as faint disturbances in soil, not cities, not empires, but beginnings. And beginnings are rarely obvious until they are recognized in hindsight. Perhaps the Ice Age does not hide a lost golden age. Perhaps it hides a series of fragile rehearsals. And if rehearsals were erased by forces beyond human control, then the real question is not what was hidden, but how many times humanity has stood at the threshold of permanence, only to be turned back by ice. To stand at the threshold of permanence is to believe, even briefly, that the world will remain stable long enough for memory to root itself in place. It is a quiet kind of hope, the hope that seasons will return in predictable rhythm, that rivers will not abandon their banks, that the sky will not suddenly darken with unfamiliar cold. If early communities during the Ice Age dared to invest in that hope, even modestly, then they were wagering against forces far larger than themselves. The geological record tells us that stability has always been provisional. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica reveal that climate does not move in smooth gradients. It lurches, it hesitates, it reverses. Tiny shifts in ocean circulation can cascade into hemispheric transformation. A weakening of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, for example, is believed to have played a role in past cooling events, redistributing heat unevenly across the globe. To those living through such shifts, the cause would have been invisible. The effects, however, would find itself destabilized at its foundations. Archaeological layers often reflect such disruption. Settlements abandoned, reoccupied, then abandoned again. Hearths left cold, tools scattered without clear continuity. Interruption becomes part of the story. In the Levant, the Natufian culture, dating from roughly 12,500 to 9,500 BCE, represents a transitional moment between mobile hunter-gatherers and early agriculturalists. Natufian communities built semi-subterranean dwellings and displayed evidence of sedentary tendencies before full-scale farming emerged. They harvested wild cereals and buried their dead with ritual care. Then the younger Dryas struck. Some scholars suggest that the abrupt cooling forced Natufian groups to adapt further, possibly accelerating the shift toward deliberate cultivation as a survival strategy. If so, climate did not merely erase complexity, it reshaped it. This reshaping complicates the idea of a single origin for civilization. It suggests that pathways toward permanence were tested, interrupted, resumed, and modified over centuries. If earlier experiments occurred during previous interstadials, their archaeological signatures might be faint and fragmentary. Climate oscillations could compress evidence into thin layers difficult to interpret conclusively. The Pleistocene was long, stretching over 2 million years. Within that span, Homo sapiens occupied only a fraction. Yet even within that fraction, the number of climatic fluctuations is substantial. Each fluctuation created new opportunities and new hazards. Imagine a coastal refuge during a warmer interval 50,000 years ago. A river delta fertile with plant life, shellfish abundant along tidal flats. Groups begin to return seasonally, then more regularly. Social bonds deepen. Ritual practices align with lunar cycles governing tides. Over generations, structures become more defined. Markers erected to denote gathering space. Knowledge of star positions shared to anticipate seasonal changes. Then the climate shifts. Sea levels drop rapidly, exposing vast plains but destabilizing coastlines. Winds intensify. The refuge becomes inhospitable. The community disperses inland. The markers remain for a time, until buried by sediment or reclaimed by shifting sands. Later, advancing ice scours the terrain, fragmenting stone and redistributing debris. From a future vantage point, little would remain to suggest that social experimentation once flourished there. Such scenarios are not evidence. They are plausible sequences grounded in climatic data and human behavioral patterns. The danger lies in overextending plausibility into certainty, but the equal danger lies in assuming that absence of durable remains equates to absence of complexity. Modern climate change offers an unsettling parallel. Coastal cities today face gradual inundation. Infrastructure built with advanced engineering may one day lie beneath water if mitigation fails. Future archaeologists examining drowned skyscrapers might misinterpret their origins if context is lost. Scale distorts interpretation. A modest Ice Age community experimenting with structured gathering might leave less trace than a single modern bridge. Yet for those who lived within it, its meaning would have been profound. There is also the question of cognitive thresholds. Archaeological evidence suggests that symbolic thinking was well established by 40,000 years ago. The capacity for abstraction, for shared myth, for planning beyond immediate survival was present. Why then should social organisation have waited passively for agriculture? Agriculture stabilises food supply, enabling population growth. But organised ritual can precede subsistence shifts. Some researchers argue that large-scale communal projects may have fostered cooperation necessary for later agricultural development, rather than the reverse. If ritual preceded farming in some regions, perhaps similar dynamics unfolded earlier in more fragile contexts. Ice cores indicate that atmospheric CO2 levels fluctuated significantly during the Pleistocene. Lower concentrations corresponded with cooler temperatures. As CO2 increased during interglacials, warming followed. These global cycles operated independently of human intention. Human communities, however, responded locally. If Ice Age layers hide traces of early civilization, they would do so unevenly. Regions spared from glaciation but later submerged would conceal evidence beneath marine sediment. Regions repeatedly glaciated would crush and scatter remnants beyond recognition. The Sahara offers an instructive contrast. During the African humid period, roughly between 14,600 and 5,000 years ago, what is now desert-supported lakes and savannas, human communities thrived there, leaving rock art depicting abundant wildlife. When aridity returned, those communities migrated. Their art remains etched in stone, testimony to a different climate. If similar climatic reversals occurred elsewhere during the deeper Ice Age, the traces may not have survived so clearly. There is a quiet humility required in contemplating lost beginnings. It does not demand belief in advanced prehistoric technology or hidden global empires. It asks only that we acknowledge the fragility of evidence and the volatility of climate. The concept of a first civilization may ultimately dissolve into multiple proto-civilizations, regional attempts at permanence, emerging and fading across millennia. Perhaps the Ice Age was less a blank canvas and more a shifting mosaic of human adaptation. Within that mosaic, moments of structured gathering may have occurred repeatedly, each moment vulnerable, each moment contingent. When ice advanced, it erased not only structures but context. Context is what transforms artifact into narrative. Without context, stone becomes geology. As modern technology allows deeper probing beneath ice sheets and seabeds, new fragments may emerge. They will not likely confirm grand legends. They may simply complicate timelines. Complication is enough. If the first stirrings of organised society were interrupted multiple times before the Holocene allowed stability, then our current civilization rests upon a rare climatic gift, a gift that feels permanent only because we have not yet witnessed its reversal. Beneath the layers of Ice Age sediment and compressed snowfall, the question persists, not of what was built, but of what was attempted. And if attempts were many and erasures frequent, then permanence itself becomes a temporary illusion. The threshold of civilization may have been crossed before. It may simply have been reclaimed by ice. If permanence is an illusion granted by a brief climatic grace, then civilization itself may be less a singular breakthrough and more a fragile alignment of forces, geological, atmospheric, biological, briefly cooperating. The Holocene feels stable because, in comparison to the chaos of the Ice Age, it has been unusually calm. But calm does not mean invulnerable. To understand what Ice Age layers might conceal, it is necessary to look not only at ice, but at the mechanics of disappearance. Glaciers do not simply cover. They move. They grind forward under their own immense weight, carving valleys, dragging boulders, pulverizing surface features into glacial till. When they retreat, they leave behind smoothed bedrock and scattered debris. Anything modestly constructed in their path would be distorted beyond recognition. Yet not all regions were equally glaciated. Southern Europe, parts of Central Asia, and segments of the Americas remained ice-free, though deeply affected by cold and aridity. These peripheral zones are where human life likely concentrated during glacial maxima. In Iberia, France, and Italy, cave systems became sanctuaries of art. Lascaux and Chauvet remain extraordinary testaments to symbolic complexity. These images endured because caves protected them. They were not destroyed by glaciers or submerged beneath oceans. Protection determines memory. Now imagine similar sanctuaries in regions later submerged by rising seas. The continental shelf of Southeast Asia, known as Sundaland, was once a vast expanse of tropical plains during lower sea levels. Today it lies underwater, fragmented into islands like Borneo, Sumatra and Java. Recent paleo-environmental reconstructions suggest that human populations occupied Sundaland for tens of thousands of years. Genetic diversity among Southeast Asian populations reflects deep ancestral roots in these drowned lands. What cultural experiments occurred there before the waters rose? The meltwater pulses that followed the last glacial maximum did not raise sea levels gradually in a linear fashion. Coral reef data and sediment analysis indicate episodes of rapid acceleration. Entire coastal plains could have been inundated within a few human generations. The archaeological record from such regions is sparse not because humans were absent, but because the sites are inaccessible. Underwater archaeology has identified submerged prehistoric structures off the coast of Israel, including circular stone formations interpreted as ancient wells or fish traps. These date to periods when sea levels were lower. They are modest in scale, but they confirm that human modification of coastal landscapes predates recorded history. Scale, once again, shapes expectation. If we are searching for the first civilization, we may unconsciously seek grandeur. But the earlier structured society might have consisted of nothing more than coordinated dwellings around a shared ritual space. It is also possible that early attempts at urbanism failed precisely because climate would not cooperate. Agriculture requires predictable rainfall and temperature patterns. The Pleistocene rarely offered that predictability for long. Even within the Holocene, droughts have toppled civilizations. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire around 2200 BCE has been linked by some researchers to severe drought. Pollen records and sediment cores indicate climatic stress during that period. If drought can destabilize a Bronze Age empire with established irrigation systems, how much more vulnerable would a nascent Ice Age settlement be? The fragility of early experiments becomes plausible, not through myth, but through environmental logic. Ice cores reveal another unsettling detail. Atmospheric methane levels rose and fell dramatically during glacial cycles. Methane, a potent greenhouse gas, influences temperature. Fluctuations suggest rapid changes in wetland extent and biomass. These changes would affect food availability. Communities dependent on wetlands or specific ecological niches would face sudden scarcity. Scarcity fractures social cohesion, yet fractures do not erase intelligence. Survivors carry knowledge into new contexts. One intriguing line of research involves ancient seafaring. Evidence suggests that humans reached Australia by at least 65,000 years ago, requiring sea crossings even at lower sea levels. Such voyages imply boats, navigation, and coordinated effort. Navigation implies knowledge of currents and stars. If seafaring capacity existed tens of thousands of years ago, then coastal organisation was likely sophisticated enough to support collective endeavour. The Pacific later became a vast network of island-hopping navigation long before European contact. Polynesian voyagers used star maps encoded in memory to traverse thousands of kilometres. This capacity did not arise spontaneously in the Holocene. It reflects a deep-rooted human relationship with water and sky. If Ice Age coastlines supported early maritime communities, their loss beneath rising seas would erase not only structures but harbours, docks, fish traps, subtle infrastructures that rarely fossilise. The question then becomes, are we underestimating the temporal depth of organised human activity simply because its earliest expressions were coastal and perishable? Ice Age layers do not merely conceal, they complicate. They force archaeologists to rely on indirect methods, isotope analysis, genetic mapping, paleo-environmental reconstruction. Each method offers fragments. Fragments can suggest patterns. For example, recent ancient DNA studies have revealed complex population turnovers in Europe during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene. Genetic continuity was not straightforward. Waves of migration reshaped demographic landscapes repeatedly. Migration disrupts cultural continuity. It also spreads ideas. If early structured communities arose and dissolved multiple times during glacial cycles, their ideas may have persisted even if their architecture did not. Mythology may preserve echoes of such cycles. Norse cosmology speaks of worlds destroyed and reborn. Hindu cosmology describes yugas, epochs that rise and fall in repeating sequence. Mesoamerican calendars encode cyclical time rather than linear progression. While these traditions developed long after the Ice Age, they may reflect an intuitive understanding of recurrence rather than permanence. Recurrence is the language of climate. The Ice Age was not a single event, but a series of oscillations spanning millions of years. Within those oscillations, Homo sapiens emerged, adapted, and experimented. Experimentation implies failure as well as success. Perhaps the Holocene's gift was not intelligence but duration, a stretch of relative stability long enough for structures to accumulate and endure. If so, then what we call the first civilization may simply be the first to outlast climate long enough to be recorded. Ice Age layers might conceal earlier rehearsals, not because they were advanced beyond our imagination, but because they were too fragile to survive glacial pressure and rising tides. The absence of monuments does not negate the presence of organisation. It suggests that permanence requires both intention and environmental consent. Without consent from climate, intention dissolves. As modern glaciers retreat and seabeds are mapped with increasing precision, small corrections to our narrative will likely continue. Earlier dates, unexpected complexity, submerged anomalies reinterpreted cautiously. None will confirm legend, but each may whisper that the story of civilization is longer, more fragmented and more tentative than once believed. And if Ice Age layers truly hide traces of a first attempt at permanence, they do so not as conspiracy, but as consequence. Consequence of ice that moves without malice. Consequence of seas that rise without memory. The deeper question remains, if our own permanence depends on climatic grace, how different are we from those whose beginnings may rest beneath frozen ground? Perhaps we are not discovering their story. Perhaps we are living within its echo. If we are living within an echo, then the sound we call progress may carry undertones of something older, something that rose once before in quieter form and dissolved without leaving monuments large enough to command memory. The echo does not demand belief, it demands attention. Attention begins with scale. For most of human existence, our species lived beneath skies defined by ice. The Pleistocene was not an anomaly, it was the norm. Interglacials like the one we inhabit now were brief intermissions. When we speak of civilization as though it were inevitable, we often forget that the environmental conditions supporting it are statistically rare. Ice sheets covering millions of square kilometres would have imposed geographic barriers that shaped human interaction. Yet barriers can also concentrate innovation. When movement is constrained, depth replaces breadth. Cultural complexity can intensify within limited space. Refugia during glacial maxima, regions spared from full ice coverage, served as ecological sanctuaries. In Europe, southern peninsulas such as Iberia, Italy and the Balkans became pockets of relative habitability. Genetic studies reveal that post-glacial populations in northern Europe often trace ancestry back to these refugia. This pattern suggests long-term continuity in certain zones. Continuity allows tradition to mature, but continuity is fragile. A single severe climatic reversal can shatter it. The Younger Dryas cooling event lasted approximately 1,200 years before abrupt warming ushered in the Holocene. To modern observers, 12 centuries may seem expansive. To geological processes, it is fleeting. To a community attempting permanence, it could be catastrophic. Evidence from pollen cores indicates that vegetation zones shifted rapidly during this period. Forests contracted, grasslands expanded. Resource availability transformed within generations. Any structured society dependent on stable agricultural experimentation, or even on predictable foraging patterns, would be strained. The Natufian culture, already mentioned, illustrates a transitional state. Semi-sedentary, ritualized, on the cusp of cultivation. The Younger Dryas did not erase them entirely, but it altered their trajectory. What if similar transitions occurred earlier in deeper Ice Age interstadials, only to be extinguished completely? Interstadials during marine isotope stage 3, roughly between 60,000 and 30,000 years ago, brought intervals of relative warmth. Archaeological sites from this period show increasing sophistication in tool technology and symbolic expression. The emergence of blade technologies, bone tools and decorative objects suggests expanding cognitive complexity. Complexity can manifest socially as well as technologically, but without durable architecture, social complexity leaves limited trace. We must also consider preservation bias beyond ice and sea. Volcanic events can bury settlements rapidly. The eruption of Mount Toba approximately 74,000 years ago has been debated as a potential bottleneck event for human populations. While some genetic data once suggested a dramatic reduction in human numbers, recent evidence complicates that narrative. Still, large eruptions can reshape climate and landscape regionally. If early organized communities existed in proximity to such events, their remains might lie beneath thick volcanic deposits, undetected. Similarly, river dynamics during glacial periods were volatile. Meltwater pulses carved new channels. Floodplains shifted unpredictably. Sites built near water sources, often the most desirable locations, would be especially vulnerable. Erosion is not dramatic. It is patient. Over tens of thousands of years, even modest slopes can strip away entire cultural layers. The archaeological record we possess is a thin residue of what once existed. And yet, within that residue, anomalies continue to appear. The discovery of footprints in white sands dated to over 20,000 years ago challenged established migration models. The presence of humans in the Americas during the last glacial maximum complicates assumptions about environmental constraints. Similarly, evidence from Bluefish Caves in Yukon suggests human activity possibly dating back 24,000 years, though interpretations remain debated. Each challenge to established timelines reveals how provisional consensus can be. If humans occupied extreme environments earlier than believed, then social organization in those environments may also have been underestimated. Social networks likely extended across vast distances, even during glacial periods. Obsidian artifacts transported hundreds of kilometers attest to exchange systems. Exchange implies trust. Trust implies repeated interaction. Repeated interaction can crystallize into structured alliances, proto-political entities not yet urban, but coordinated. Such entities would not necessarily produce monumental architecture. Their cohesion may have been embedded in ritual and reciprocity rather than stone. Ice Age layers, therefore, might conceal not cities, but networks. Networks are harder to detect archaeologically. Genetic data has begun to reveal the depth of interaction between Homo sapiens and other hominins. Neanderthal DNA persists in modern populations outside Africa. Denisovan DNA appears in Melanesian and some Asian groups. These genetic legacies indicate interbreeding and coexistence, not simple replacement. Hybrid traditions are difficult to trace. Hybrid traditions are difficult to trace materially. The concept of a first civilization might therefore be too narrow. Instead of a singular origin, there may have been multiple convergences, moments when diverse groups coalesced around shared symbols, only to disperse under climatic stress. Each convergence would leave faint, overlapping signatures. Ice sheets advancing would homogenize those signatures, compressing diversity into geological noise. When the ice retreated, new populations entered altered landscapes. Without awareness of what preceded them, they built anew. Civilization as we define it, urban centers, writing, metallurgy, emerged during a rare climatic calm. But calm does not imply uniqueness of attempt. Perhaps earlier attempts lacked metallurgy not because they lacked intelligence, but because the ecological conditions necessary for sustained experimentation were absent. Agriculture flourished in the Holocene partly because rainfall patterns stabilized and seasons became predictable. Prior to that, even if humans experimented with cultivation, unstable climate could have undone progress repeatedly. Repeated failure leaves little archaeological grandeur, yet failure can accumulate into knowledge. Myths of lost golden ages may encode collective memory of such attempts, not literal cities of advanced technology, but eras of relative abundance and organization lost to environmental upheaval. The Ice Age, then, is not merely a backdrop to human emergence. It is an active editor. It selects what survives. It buries what does not. And when we drill through ice cores or map drowned coastlines, we're not simply uncovering data. We're confronting the possibility that our narrative of origins is shaped as much by survival bias as by fact. The echo grows clearer with each anomaly, each earlier date, each unexpected discovery. Not clear enough to rewrite textbooks overnight, but clear enough to introduce humility. If the first civilization flickered during a fragile interlude and was extinguished by climate before leaving durable monuments, then its legacy may not be stone at all. It may be encoded in our capacity to try again, to attempt permanence despite volatility, to gather despite uncertainty. Ice Age layers may conceal structures and settlements, but more profoundly they conceal precedent. And precedent suggests that what we call the beginning may not have been the first time humanity reached for something lasting. It may simply be the first time climate allowed it to endure. If endurance is the true difference between an attempt and a legacy, then civilization may owe its existence not only to human ingenuity, but to a rare alignment of planetary calm. That alignment feels natural now, almost guaranteed. Seasons follow seasons. Ice remains mostly confined to poles. Coastlines shift, but slowly enough for cities to adapt, at least for now. Yet the deeper past whispers that such calm is an exception. Ice Age climate was punctuated by abrupt transitions known as Heinrich events, periods when massive armadas of icebergs broke off from continental ice sheets and drifted into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean circulation. Sediment cores from the ocean floor preserve layers of debris dropped by melting icebergs, marking these dramatic episodes. To those living along affected coastlines, such shifts would not have been subtle. Ocean currents altering temperature patterns could transform entire ecosystems. Fish populations might collapse or migrate. Shorelines might freeze unexpectedly. If early organised communities were coastal, as seems plausible given human affinity for marine resources, Heinrich events would have destabilised them severely. Instability erodes structure. There is a quiet misconception embedded in modern thought that complexity naturally accumulates over time. In reality, complexity is often punctuated by collapse. Systems rise, peak, fragment and reform. The archaeological record of later historical civilizations confirms this. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE saw major Mediterranean powers disintegrate within decades. Trade networks vanished. Writing systems disappeared in some regions. Urban centres were abandoned. If collapse can occur within literate metalworking societies connected by maritime trade, how much more vulnerable would a nascent Ice Age society have been? The Ice Age, then, may not have been a blank era before civilization, but a long sequence of trials. Trial requires resilience. Resilience requires memory. Memory does not always reside in architecture. Among Arctic indigenous cultures, survival knowledge is embedded in oral transmission. Precise instructions for navigating ice, tracking seasonal shifts and anticipating storms. This knowledge is dynamic, evolving with environmental change. If Ice Age communities developed similarly adaptive traditions, their sophistication would be invisible to archaeologists unless encoded materially. Material encoding requires stability. When stability falters, encoding becomes ephemeral. There is also the matter of sea level fall during glacial maxima. As ice sheets expanded, global sea levels dropped by over 100 metres. Vast continental shelves were exposed, creating new habitable territories. These shelves would have been ecologically rich, attracting settlement. Yet when ice melted, these lands disappeared. The Sunda Shelf, the Sahel Shelf, connecting Australia and New Guinea, and the Bering Shelf connecting Asia and North America were all once above water. They were not marginal lands. They were central corridors of migration and habitation. Modern underwater surveys have only scratched their surfaces. The absence of extensive archaeological exploration beneath these waters is not proof of absence of past life. It reflects logistical limitation. If structured settlements once dotted these shelves, they now lie beneath layers of sediment and ocean. Sediment accumulation can bury structures deeply within a few millennia. Over tens of thousands of years, detection becomes exponentially more difficult. Yet even within this obscurity, hints emerge. Submerged stone alignments off the coast of India, controversial and debated, suggest that some coastal modifications predate known historical timelines. Whether natural or artificial, such findings prompt re-evaluation of where we look for origins. The key is caution, without dismissal. Scientific rigour requires skepticism. But skepticism should not calcify into dogma. Dogma resists anomaly. Anomaly is often the first sign that a narrative is incomplete. The Denisovan discovery reminds us that entire chapters of human existence can remain hidden until technology advances enough to detect them. Perhaps cultural chapters are similarly obscured. Consider the role of fire in early human societies. Controlled fire use dates back hundreds of thousands of years. Fire creates communal space. It extends activity into night. It fosters storytelling and collective identity. Such communal cohesion is foundational to civilization. If Ice Age communities gathered consistently around shared firelight, weaving narratives about stars and seasons, their social sophistication may have been profound even in the absence of stone monuments. The Pleistocene sky, free from artificial illumination, would have dominated imagination. The slow procession of constellations over millennia might have been noticed, mythologized, ritualized. Astronomical alignment at later sites such as Stonehenge demonstrates a deep human impulse to anchor community and celestial rhythm. Perhaps earlier alignments existed in perishable form, wooden posts marking solstices, earthen mounds long eroded. Erosion is patient. Time is indifferent. When ice advances or seas rise, they do not preserve context. They scramble it. The idea that Ice Age layers hide a first civilization does not require belief in advanced technology lost to conspiracy. It invites reflection on the interplay between environment and memory. What survives is often accidental. What is lost may have been meaningful. The Holocene's relative stability allowed agricultural surplus, which supported specialization. Specialization enabled monumental architecture and writing. But writing may not mark the birth of civilization. It may mark the birth of durable record. Durable record shapes perception of origin. Without record, earlier experiments fade into ambiguity. Perhaps the first civilization was not erased because it failed morally or technologically, but because climate denied it duration. Duration is the true architect of legacy. The Ice Age may have offered windows of opportunity, brief alignments of warmth and resource abundance. Within those windows, humans may have gathered, organized, ritualized. Then the window closed. Ice returned. Seas rose. Rivers shifted. Memory fragmented. When warmth returned in the Holocene, humanity stood again at the threshold of permanence, this time granted a longer reprieve. The structures built during this reprieve endured long enough to fossilize into certainty. Certainty, however, is a function of survival bias. If Ice Age layers conceal prior thresholds crossed and lost, then the narrative of first becomes fluid. Fluidity does not undermine our history. It deepens it. It suggests that civilization is less a singular awakening and more a recurring aspiration. An aspiration to remain. An aspiration to anchor meaning in landscape despite the volatility of climate. Ice does not lie. It records. But what it records most faithfully is change. If the first civilization lies hidden beneath its layers, it does so not as mythic Atlantis, but as a testament to fragility. A reminder that permanence depends not only on human will, but on planetary patience. And planetary patience has always been conditional. Planetary patience is not infinite. It stretches across epochs, then tightens without warning. Ice expands, oceans pulse. Winds redraw coastlines. Through all of it, humanity adapts, reorganizes, and tells stories about what was lost. Perhaps that is the most enduring pattern of all, not the monuments themselves, but the insistence on remembering. If Ice Age layers hide traces of an earlier attempt at civilization, then the question becomes more subtle. What would count as proof? Not a skyline beneath Antarctica, not machinery fossilized in permafrost. The Earth offers no such spectacle. Instead, proof would likely arrive as convergence, multiple small anomalies aligning quietly. Already there are signs that the boundary between prehistory and history is more porous than once assumed. Take the discovery of early complex structures in what is now northeastern Jordan, known as the Desert Kites. These vast stone alignments, visible from the air, were used as large-scale animal traps and date back at least 9,000 years, possibly earlier. They reveal coordinated effort across significant distances. Coordination at scale predates writing. Similarly, recent research into ancient water management systems in regions once considered purely nomadic suggests that even mobile societies engineered landscapes in subtle ways. Channels, small dams, and seasonal storage systems leave faint but detectable traces. If Ice Age communities engineered their environment modestly, perhaps through fish weirs along rivers, wooden frameworks for seasonal dwellings, or structured gathering circles, their imprint would be delicate. Delicate imprints rarely survive glacial pressure. The younger Dryas boundary layer contains microscopic evidence of environmental disruption, nanodiamonds, platinum anomalies, charcoal deposits. Interpretations vary, but the data reveal that something abrupt occurred. Abrupt events compress history. Compression distorts scale. From the perspective of deep time, a millennium is fleeting. From the perspective of human culture, it is vast. If an Ice Age civilization, however small, existed for even 500 years before being erased by climate, its duration would have shaped multiple generations. Its collapse would have felt apocalyptic. Yet in sedimentary record, 500 years is almost invisible. This is the paradox of early civilization research. The shorter its lifespan, the less likely it is to endure materially. But short lifespans do not negate significance. Significance resides in impact, not duration. Genetic studies have revealed population bottlenecks and expansions correlated with climatic events. Around 70,000 years ago, some evidence once suggested a drastic reduction in human population, though newer research nuances that claim. Still, fluctuations in population density reflect environmental pressure. Fluctuations create social stress. Social stress can fracture organized communities or catalyze innovation. Innovation requires shared intent. Shared intent is the embryo of civilization. In Siberia, preserved wooden artifacts have occasionally emerged from permafrost. Wood rarely survives tens of thousands of years unless frozen. If entire settlements constructed from timber once existed in subarctic regions during warmer intervals, only extraordinary preservation conditions would reveal them. As global warming accelerates permafrost thaw, archaeologists face a race against decay. Artifacts that survived millennia in frozen ground begin to deteriorate within seasons once exposed. This temporal compression mirrors the Ice Age itself. Long periods of preservation punctuated by rapid change. The Holocene, our current interglacial, has lasted approximately 11,700 years. Previous interglacials were often shorter. There is no guarantee that stability will persist indefinitely. If Ice Age layers conceal early attempts at permanence, then our era may represent not a beginning, but a rare extension. There is also the matter of cognitive continuity. The brain of a human 40,000 years ago was anatomically indistinguishable from ours. Creativity, planning, abstract thought, these capacities were present. The absence of early cities may therefore reflect environmental constraint rather than intellectual limitation. Environmental constraint is a powerful filter. When climate fluctuates rapidly, long-term investment in infrastructure becomes risky. Why build in stone if rising ice or shifting rivers might erase it within decades? Mobility may have been adaptive precisely because permanence was dangerous. If so, then early civilizations may have been consciously flexible, structured socially but not materially. Such flexibility leaves faint archaeological residue. The Sahara once bloomed with lakes and grasslands. Human communities thrived there, leaving rock art and habitation sites. When aridity returned, they migrated. The desert preserved some traces, but many were lost. Ice Age Europe and Asia experienced similar oscillations, though driven by cold rather than drought. The memory of these shifts may linger in mythic cycles, ages of abundance followed by desolation. While myth cannot serve as direct evidence, it reveals how deeply environmental volatility shaped human consciousness. If the first civilization rose during a fleeting interlude and was undone by returning cold or rising water, its collapse would echo through story. Stories migrate more easily than stone. Archaeologists occasionally encounter out-of-place artifacts, objects whose dating challenges conventional models. Often, further analysis resolves the discrepancy. Contamination, reworking of sediment, or misinterpretation explains the anomaly. Yet occasionally, anomalies stand. White sands footprints extended human presence in North America thousands of years earlier than widely accepted. Such findings do not rewrite the entire narrative, but they widen it. Widening creates space for possibility. Possibility is not proof, but proof often begins as possibility. If Ice Age layers hide the earlier stirrings of organised human society, discovery may come not as a singular revelation, but as a series of subtle recalibrations. An earlier date here, unexpected structural complexity there, a submerged site cautiously interpreted as anthropogenic. Gradually the margin shifts. The word first becomes tentative. History resists absolutism. It prefers revision. Perhaps the first civilization was not a towering achievement, but a modest experiment, a network of seasonal gatherings aligned to stars, reinforced by ritual and exchange. Perhaps it lasted only centuries before climate intervened. Perhaps its physical traces lie beneath drowned shelves or compressed under glacial sediment, indistinguishable until technology refines our perception further. Or perhaps the very idea of a singular first civilization is misguided, and what lies beneath Ice Age layers is evidence of multiple beginnings, each extinguished, each resumed. Planetary patience may have allowed humanity several rehearsals before granting a stage long enough for monuments to endure. If so, then the Ice Age is not a void before history. It is a threshold crossed repeatedly. And as we contemplate melting ice and shifting climate today, the possibility that we are not the first to stand on such a threshold becomes less abstract. The layers beneath us may not conceal grandeur. They may conceal warning, not a warning of conspiracy or forgotten technology, but of fragility. Fragility shared across ages. Fragility that binds the first attempts at permanence to our own. And if the ice remembers cycles more faithfully than we do, then its silence may be less about concealment and more about patience, waiting for us to understand what endurance truly requires. If endurance requires more than ingenuity, then perhaps the true foundation of civilization is not stone or script, but climate held steady long enough for memory to accumulate. Stability is rarely celebrated because it feels ordinary. Yet in geological terms it is extraordinary. The Ice Age was defined by instability. Even during warmer interglacial intervals, the planet carried the residue of glacial momentum. Ice sheets did not retreat smoothly, they fractured. Oceans did not rise gently, they surged. Human societies during this era were not static observers. They were participants in a world constantly rearranging itself. To imagine a first civilization hidden beneath Ice Age layers is to imagine a society that tried to root itself in motion, a society that chose stillness in a shifting landscape. Stillness requires confidence. Confidence requires precedent. Where would precedent have come from in a world so volatile? Perhaps from repeated gatherings, from shared stories about seasons past, from the observation that certain stars returned each year despite terrestrial upheaval. Celestial cycles offered a form of stability when climate did not. Many ancient cultures later constructed cosmologies centered on eternal return, the idea that time loops, that ages recur. This worldview contrasts sharply with modern linear conceptions of progress. Linear thinking is comfortable in stable climates. Cyclical thinking may emerge from living through repeated environmental resets. If Ice Age communities internalize cyclical time, their social organization may have reflected it. Gatherings timed to celestial recurrence, rituals acknowledging both renewal and destruction. Such rituals would not fossilize easily. But perhaps subtle alignments might. The discovery of Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, a stone circle dating to around 7000 BCE, suggests early astronomical alignment in a region that was once wetter and more hospitable. The site predates the pyramids by millennia and demonstrates organized celestial observation. If such alignments existed at the dawn of the Holocene, what precedents informed them? Innovation rarely emerges in isolation. It evolves from prior experimentation. Even if earlier alignments were constructed in perishable materials, wooden posts, earthen embankments, they would leave minimal trace unless preserved under exceptional conditions. Ice can preserve, but it also destroys. Glacial movement pulverizes, but permafrost entombs. The dual nature of ice complicates interpretation. In northern Europe, archaeological evidence suggests human presence up to the margins of retreating ice sheets during the late Pleistocene. As ice withdrew, humans followed. This pursuit of newly exposed land implies opportunism and courage. It also implies awareness of climatic rhythm. Communities that track retreating ice must possess generational memory of change. Generational memory is social glue. If early structured societies formed in the wake of retreating glaciers, taking advantage of fertile meltwater plains, they would have flourished briefly before facing the next oscillation. Brief flourishing can feel like destiny to those within it. Then collapse reframes destiny as illusion. The Holocene allowed longer flourishing, but it too contains abrupt episodes. The 8.2 kiloyear event saw a sudden cooling, triggered by the drainage of glacial Lake Agassiz into the North Atlantic. Archaeological records from this period show disruptions in settlement patterns. Even within stability, volatility persists. The notion of a first civilization hidden under Ice Age layers may therefore reflect a deeper intuition that humanity has been negotiating with climate far longer than our written records admit. Negotiation implies agency, but agency has limits. As modern researchers examine ancient DNA extracted from sediments, not only from bones, but directly from soil, they uncover traces of species once present in a region even when skeletal remains are absent. Environmental DNA analysis is expanding our capacity to detect past life. Perhaps future technologies will refine detection of anthropogenic signatures, chemical markers of sustained habitation, microscopic patterns in sediment indicative of structured activity. Already, researchers analyze pollen and charcoal layers to infer human-induced landscape modification thousands of years ago. Subtle traces accumulate. The Ice Age may hide more subtle traces than dramatic ruins, and subtle traces require patience. It is easy to dismiss the idea of a pre-Holocene civilization as speculation, because it challenges entrenched timelines. Yet timelines have shifted before. For decades, the Clovis culture was considered the earliest human presence in the Americas. That model has been revised repeatedly. Revisions do not weaken science, they strengthen it. Science thrives on anomaly. Anomaly invites deeper exploration. If submerged landscapes continue to reveal early human modification, if permafrost thaw uncovers unexpectedly complex artifacts, if genetic studies expose unanticipated interaction networks, then the boundary of first may blur. Blur does not equal chaos, it equals depth. The Ice Age spans over 2 million years, but Homo sapiens occupied only its later chapters. Within those chapters, climatic variability was intense. If even one of those warmer chapters allowed structured social experimentation before being extinguished, its memory may survive only as faint disturbance. Disturbance in sediment, disturbance in myth, disturbance in our certainty. Certainty is comforting, but comfort can obscure fragility. The deeper lesson of Ice Age layers may not concern hidden grandeur but hidden attempts that demonstrate humanity's persistent drive to anchor meaning despite instability. If those attempts were erased by returning cold or rising seas, then their erasure was not failure. It was timing. Timing governed by forces beyond human control. The Holocene may represent a rare alignment of timing and opportunity. But alignment is not guaranteed. As modern climate shifts accelerate, the parallels become difficult to ignore. Rising seas threaten coastal cities. Glaciers retreat. Permafrost thaws. We are witnessing in decades processes that once unfolded over centuries. If earlier civilizations, modest or otherwise, were undone by similar processes, their story is not alien to ours. It is familiar. Perhaps the Ice Age conceals not only their beginnings, but their endings. And perhaps the reason the question of a hidden first civilization resonates so deeply is because it mirrors our own unease. We sense that permanence is provisional, that stability is borrowed, that beneath our cities lies sediment once ocean, and beneath that ocean once land. The Ice Age layers may not reveal lost empires. They may reveal repetition. Repetition of hope. Repetition of collapse. Repetition of return. If so, then the first civilization may not be singular or mythic. It may be a pattern. And patterns, once recognized, invite reflection not on what was hidden, but on what we are building now, upon ground that has shifted before. If endurance requires more than intelligence, if it requires a rare harmony between human intention and planetary rhythm, then the true mystery beneath Ice Age layers is not what was built, but what was almost built. There is a quiet tension in that distinction. Almost built suggests proximity, near success, an edge approached but not crossed, and throughout the Pleistocene, humanity may have approached that edge repeatedly. The archaeological record reveals an accelerating curve of symbolic behaviour, beginning roughly 50,000 to 40,000 years ago. Personal adornment, musical instruments such as bone flutes found in German caves, complex composite tools, these are not isolated acts of survival. They're expressions of shared identity. Shared identity is the invisible infrastructure of civilization. Yet identity alone cannot withstand glacial advance or oceanic surge. Climate models show that during the last glacial maximum, ice sheets depressed land masses under their immense weight. When the ice melted, the land rebounded slowly, a process known as isostatic adjustment. Shorelines rose and fell not only with sea level, but with shifting crust. Imagine attempting to anchor a settlement in such a world. The ground itself would be unreliable over centuries. Archaeologists studying submerged paleo-landscapes in the North Sea have mapped ancient river systems now buried beneath sediment. These landscapes once supported Mesolithic populations. Stone tools dredged accidentally by fishing trawlers testify to human presence. But these finds are scattered, dislocated from context. Context once lost is rarely recoverable. If earlier Ice Age societies existed in these regions, their structural coherence has been fragmented beyond reconstruction. There is also the matter of ice-free corridors in North America. During deglaciation, corridors opened between retreating ice sheets, allowing human migration southward. Evidence suggests that these corridors were ecologically viable only during certain windows. Windows, again, define opportunity. Opportunity defines experimentation. If organised settlements formed within such corridors during brief warm intervals, advancing ice could have erased them entirely. The notion of lost civilization often conjures images of advanced technology suppressed or hidden. But loss can be simpler and more tragic. Loss can be geological inevitability. Ice sheets are not selective. They do not preserve cultural hierarchy. They crush indiscriminately. Under such conditions, only the most durable materials survive, and even those may be displaced far from origin. The Bering Land Bridge, once a broad expanse connecting Asia and North America, supported diverse ecosystems. Human populations likely inhabited it for thousands of years. When sea levels rose, Beringia vanished beneath water. Modern genetic studies indicate that populations migrating into the Americas experienced periods of isolation, sometimes referred to as the Beringian standstill. During this isolation, cultural practices may have evolved uniquely. If structured communities emerged there, they are now submerged. Submersion is final. Unless technology evolves to excavate extensively beneath ocean sediment, such chapters remain inaccessible. Antarctica remains the most dramatic image of concealment, but its relevance to human prehistory is constrained by its extreme conditions during our species' existence. There is no credible evidence of temperate human habitation there in the late Pleistocene. The true concealment lies along drowned shelves and scoured continental margins, and yet the imagination returns to ice because ice preserves more than sand or water. In alpine regions, retreating glaciers have revealed artifacts lost by ancient travellers, shoes, weapons, fragments of clothing. These finds illustrate how preservation can freeze moments of ordinary life. If an entire community had been overtaken rapidly by glacial advance, could traces survive beneath compressed layers? Theoretically, yes, though distortion would be immense. The difficulty is access. Drilling through kilometers of ice to reach bedrock is technologically possible but limited in scope. Scientific drilling targets climate data, not archaeological investigation. Even if anomalous structures were detected in subglacial radar scans, interpretation would require extreme caution. The line between natural formation and human modification is delicate. Pareidolia, the tendency to perceive patterns where none exist, has misled observers before. Yet skepticism must coexist with curiosity. The Denisovan cave offered only fragments, yet those fragments altered the human story profoundly. It is conceivable that future technologies, perhaps more sensitive geophysical imaging or refined sediment analysis, could detect subtle anthropogenic signatures beneath ice or sea. Anthropogenic signatures need not be monumental. They might be chemical anomalies indicating prolonged habitation, altered soil composition, unusual charcoal concentrations, micro-artifacts embedded within sediment layers. Already microscopic analysis has revealed ancient hearth residues in caves once thought empty. Small evidence, large implications. If the first civilization was not defined by skyscrapers or metal tools, but by sustained communal gathering and symbolic coherence, then its trace may reside not in architecture, but in pattern. Pattern in isotopic shifts reflecting coordinated diet. Pattern in tool standardization across distance. Pattern in genetic intermixing suggesting stable networks. Such patterns are subtle and require interpretive humility. The narrative of civilization as a singular breakthrough in the Holocene may be convenient, but convenience is not always completeness. Completeness is elusive. Perhaps the Ice Age does not conceal a lost empire, but a series of rehearsals, moments when humans tested permanence under unstable skies. Each rehearsal may have ended not with moral failure, but with environmental reset. Reset is not annihilation, it is interruption. When the Holocene stabilized climate long enough for agriculture to anchor communities, humanity crossed the threshold more decisively. But that crossing may have been preceded by others, less visible, less enduring. If so, then Ice Age layers are not vaults of secret grandeur. They are archives of near success. And near success carries a quiet warning. It suggests that intelligence and creativity alone are insufficient for endurance. Endurance requires planetary consent. If climate withdraws that consent, permanence dissolves. The deeper implication is not that we have been deceived about our origins, but that we may misunderstand the fragility of our own foundation. Ice remembers cycles of expansion and retreat. It records atmospheric composition shifting, temperature oscillating, ecosystems collapsing and reforming. Within those cycles, humanity emerged and experimented. Some experiments endured, others likely did not. The traces of those that did not may rest beneath compressed sediment or drowned plains, indistinguishable until context aligns. Perhaps we will never uncover definitive proof of a pre-Holocene civilization. Perhaps the evidence is too faint, too fragmented. But the possibility itself reshapes perspective. It transforms the Ice Age from a barren prelude into a complex stage where humanity repeatedly approached permanence. And if permanence has always depended on climate's mercy, then the true lesson beneath the ice is not about what was hidden. It is about how easily it can be lost. If harmony between human intention and planetary rhythm is the true architect of civilization, then discord becomes its quiet undoing. Ice advances without negotiation, Oceans swell without malice. The Earth does not conspire, it recalibrates, and when it recalibrates, permanence trembles. The possibility that Ice Age layers conceal traces of an earlier structured society is less about hidden monuments and more about hidden misalignments, moments when human organisation outpaced environmental stability. A settlement may have flourished for centuries, its social systems intricate, its rituals synchronised with the stars. Then a shift in temperature altered migration routes. A river froze unpredictably. A coastline eroded faster than memory could adjust. When climate shifts, it does not dismantle architecture alone. It dismantles confidence. Confidence allows investment. Investment allows continuity. Without continuity, even the most promising social experiment dissolves into mobility. The archaeological record shows repeated cycles of expansion and contraction even within the Holocene. The Maya civilization, for example, experienced dramatic population growth followed by severe decline associated with drought and environmental strain. Cities were abandoned not because knowledge vanished, but because conditions undermined stability. If Holocene societies were vulnerable to climate stress, Pleistocene societies would have faced far greater volatility. Yet volatility does not preclude complexity. Human cognition, fully modern for tens of thousands of years, was capable of abstraction, planning, symbolic communication. Social networks likely spanned wide territories long before agriculture. Trade routes evidenced by exotic materials found far from their sources, obsidian, shells, pigments, suggest exchange systems stretching hundreds of kilometers. Such networks require trust, communication, and mutual expectation. Expectation is the seed of permanence. If Ice Age communities gathered seasonally at fixed convergence points, reinforcing alliances and exchanging resources, those points may have functioned as proto-civilizational hubs. But hubs require environmental predictability. A convergence point dependent on a river delta could vanish with shifting channels. A coastal gathering site could be drowned by rising seas. A refuge spared by one glacial advance could be crushed by the next. The Pleistocene landscape was dynamic. Glacial isostatic adjustment, the rebound of land after ice retreat, continues even today in parts of Scandinavia and Canada. Entire regions slowly rise or sink in response to ancient ice weight. Imagine building on land that itself moves over centuries. Foundations would not remain stable. Perhaps early societies recognized this instability and chose materials accordingly: wood, earth, woven fiber, adaptable but perishable. Perishability is not primitiveness, it is responsiveness. In tropical regions during glacial periods, forests contracted and expanded with rainfall patterns. Human groups adapted fluidly to these changes. Archaeological evidence from Southeast Asia suggests continuity of occupation across climatic oscillations. Continuity, however, does not always leave monumental residue. It leaves cultural memory. Cultural memory can survive environmental erasure. Flood myths, Age of Ice legends, tales of world-ending winters appear across diverse traditions. Scholars caution against literal interpretation, but symbolic parallels persist. In some Inuit traditions, stories describe ancient times when the sea rose and changed the land dramatically. These narratives may reflect generational memory of post-glacial sea level rise. Oral tradition can preserve environmental events across millennia. If early organized societies were undone by climatic upheaval, their collapse may have been encoded in myth long before written language. Myth does not provide coordinates, but it preserves emotional truth. Emotional truth may be the only residue of a civilization too fragile to fossilize. The Ice Age, then, may not hide technological marvels, it may hide emotional catastrophes. Catastrophes experienced by communities who believed briefly that they had found equilibrium. Equilibrium is seductive. When climate stabilizes for even a few centuries, it can feel eternal. We too have lived within such seduction. The Holocene's relative calm has allowed agriculture, metallurgy, industry, digital networks. Yet even within this calm, ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica respond to warming. Glaciers retreat at accelerating rates. Sea levels rise incrementally. Incrementally can become abruptly. The 8.2 kiloyear event demonstrated how quickly climate can shift, even within interglacials. The Little Ice Age of the past millennium, though modest compared to Pleistocene cold, disrupted European agriculture and reshaped societies. Climate need not return to full glacial conditions to destabilize civilization. It only needs to deviate beyond tolerance thresholds. If earlier structured communities during the Ice Age faced similar thresholds repeatedly, their collapse becomes not mysterious, but inevitable. Inevitable does not mean unimportant. Each collapse would have informed subsequent adaptation. Perhaps the first civilization was not a single moment, but a series of iterative attempts, gatherings growing more complex, then fragmenting under environmental stress. Iteration leaves subtle traces. Subtle traces may lie beneath layers of glacial sediment or oceanic silt, indistinguishable without context. Context requires patience and humility. Humility acknowledges that absence of evidence reflects limits of access. Access to submerged continental shelves remains sparse. Access to deep subglacial bedrock remains technologically challenging. Yet technology advances. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite gravimetry, environmental DNA analysis. These tools extend perception beyond what was once possible. Each extension narrows ignorance slightly, but ignorance never disappears entirely. There will always be layers beyond reach. If the Ice Age conceals the faint outline of a first structured society, it may remain forever partial. Partial knowledge is not failure. It is invitation. Invitation to question narratives that present civilization as inevitable. Invitation to recognize that stability is a gift, not a guarantee. The most unsettling implication of a hidden first civilization is not that history was concealed deliberately. It is that climate can erase without intention, erase thoroughly, erase meaning, erase architecture, leave behind only a species capable of trying again. Perhaps that is the true continuity beneath Ice Age layers. Not buildings, not scripts, but resilience. Resilience that rises repeatedly after collapse. Resilience that forgets its previous thresholds crossed. If the first civilization flickered and vanished beneath ice or rising seas, its legacy may be invisible not because it was insignificant, but because it lacked duration. Duration is the currency of recognition, and recognition, as fragile as permanence itself, depends on what survives the next shift. The ice does not hide with purpose. It covers, compresses, transforms, and when it retreats, it reveals selectively. The question that lingers is no longer whether a first civilization lies beneath frozen ground. It is whether we, living within a rare climatic calm, understand how thin that calm may be. Because beneath our own cities lies sediment shaped by ancient seas. And beneath that sediment lies memory of a world where permanence was attempted before, and reclaimed by ice without hesitation. And perhaps that is the most difficult thought to sit with, that permanence has never belonged to us. It has only been loaned. Ice does not move with urgency, yet it reshapes continents. Oceans do not rise with intent, yet they redraw maps without remorse. Through each cycle of advance and retreat, humanity has walked the edge between adaptation and disappearance, sometimes barely aware of how narrow that edge truly is. If Ice Age layers conceal the faint traces of a first civilization, then what they truly conceal is not lost grandeur, but forgotten vulnerability. There is something almost humbling in that realization. We search for hidden cities beneath Antarctica, for geometric anomalies beneath radar scans, for submerged stone foundations beneath drowned shelves. Yet the deeper concealment may be subtler. It may be the record of communities who believed they had found equilibrium, only to discover that equilibrium was temporary. The Pleistocene was not empty of intelligence. It was filled with minds like ours, minds capable of art, ritual, cooperation, navigation, planning. The cave painters at Chauvet were not primitive in imagination. The toolmakers of Siberia were not lacking foresight. The seafarers who crossed into Sarwell tens of thousands of years ago possessed daring and coordination. If organised gatherings formed during warmer interludes, structured, meaningful, perhaps even semi-permanent, then their disappearance was not evidence of inadequacy. It was evidence of scale. Climate operates at a scale beyond community, beyond generation, beyond intention. Scale humbles permanence. The Holocene, our current interglacial, has allowed approximately 12 millennia of relative stability. That span feels immense in human reckoning. Cities have risen and fallen within it. Empires have flourished and fractured. Writing has emerged and evolved. Yet in geological context, 12,000 years is a breath. Ice cores from Antarctica stretch back hundreds of thousands of years, recording cycles of glaciation and warmth with indifferent precision. Within those cycles, our entire recorded history occupies a thin band near the top. Thin layers can vanish. Sea level rise during past deglaciations was not always gradual. Meltwater pulses accelerated ocean expansion in centuries. Coastlines shifted dramatically within human lifetimes. Modern projections of sea level rise are debated in pace, but not in direction. We are watching glaciers retreat in Greenland and Antarctica. We are measuring ice mass loss year by year. The language of climate science has become urgent. If earlier structured societies were erased by similar processes, rising seas, shifting rainfall, abrupt cooling, then the Ice Age layers are not hiding conspiracy. They are hiding precedent. Precedent of fragility. Perhaps that is why the idea of a hidden first civilization resonates. It speaks to an intuition that what feels permanent may not be. We prefer narratives of ascent, of steady progress from cave to city, from stone to steel. But the deeper record suggests oscillation, rise, fall, regroup. If the first civilization was attempted during the Ice Age and lost, it may not have been lost to ignorance or moral failing, but to timing. Timing determined by orbital cycles, the Milankovitch rhythms that subtly alter Earth's tilt and orbit over tens of thousands of years. These cycles influence glaciation patterns. Human intention cannot negotiate with orbital mechanics, yet human memory can attempt to outlast them. Myth, ritual, and oral tradition may have carried fragments of earlier attempts across generations, even if architecture did not survive. Flood stories, Age of Ice legends, tales of world renewal, they echo across continents not as evidence of singular events, but as reflections of recurring environmental stress. If we are listening carefully, perhaps those echoes are less about lost cities and more about lost stability. The Ice Age does not need to conceal pyramids to hold meaning. It only needs to remind us that climate shifts can erase complexity with quiet efficiency. Modern civilization, for all its technological power, remains bound to climate stability. Agriculture depends on predictable rainfall. Infrastructure depends on coastlines remaining where they are. Supply chains depend on seasons behaving within expected ranges. When seasons deviate persistently, systems strain. Earlier communities would have strained as well. If they attempted permanence and were undone by environmental recalibration, their story is not alien to ours, it is mirrored. The ice beneath Antarctica may never reveal carved pillars or buried cities. Submerged continental shells may never yield fully excavated settlements. The first civilization, if it existed before the Holocene, may remain a hypothesis shaped by fragments. But fragments are not meaningless. They suggest that the human drive to organize, to anchor identity in place, to align ritual with cosmos, is older than our monuments. They suggest that attempts preceded endurance, and endurance was granted not by superiority, but by circumstance. Perhaps the real question is not whether Ice Age layers hide the first civilization. Perhaps the real question is whether civilization, by its nature, always exists on borrowed time. If climate stability is the silent partner of permanence, then every city stands upon a foundation deeper than stone, a foundation of atmospheric balance and oceanic rhythm. When that balance shifts, permanence trembles. Ice remembers cycles of return. It remembers cold after warmth, warmth after cold. It records without emotion. And beneath its layered silence lies a lesson older than writing, a lesson about fragility, a lesson about repetition, a lesson about how many times humanity may have stood at the edge of permanence, believing the ground beneath them would remain still. If the first civilization flickered and was reclaimed by ice, then its absence is not proof that it never was. It is proof that endurance is rare. We stand now within one of those rare intervals. Our cities gleam, our networks span continents, our satellites orbit above clouds. Yet beneath our foundations lie sediments shaped by ancient seas. Beneath those seas lie plains once walked by humans, whose stories we only partially grasp. And beneath the ice, compressed and patient, lies a record of cycles that will continue long after our own monuments fade. The question is no longer whether something is hidden beneath Ice Age layers. The question is whether we understand what it means that everything eventually is.